Nation, welcome back to Collection Cutdown. Today's video, no surprise, is 28 Weeks Later. It's the sequel to 28 Days Later, which I reviewed last time. I don't remember enjoying this one as much as I enjoyed the first one, and I don't know whether that's just because it maybe doesn't have as happy an ending, because that's a big thing for me. Like, if I go through the horror of a horror movie, I kind of want some kind of happy ending at the end of it. Because it has a great cast of people who I tend to like, but also some people who I don't like as much. I'm not a huge fan of Jeremy Renner, for example. So, you know, that might be a factor too. But yeah, I didn't find this one as memorable from memory. It's possible I just didn't pay as much attention, which I do. I do remember at least some of it taking part in some kind of quarantine facility or lab or something like that. Maybe that's at the beginning of the film, but you know, that's a super vague thing. I'm pretty sure that I bought this DVD purely because I owned the first one. That's just something I do. As I've discussed before, I like to complete the set. So I'm sure if I saw this cheap or whatever, or it's possible that I bought it before seeing it, knowing that I had the first one, and I'm like, well, I'll probably buy it anyway to complete the set, so if I'm going to watch it, I may as well own it. Something along those lines. I do remember Robert Carlyle being in this, and I generally quite like him. But yeah, it has Rose Byrne and Imogen Poots and Idris Elba, and I like all those people, so I'm excited to see them again and figure out why I don't find this film very memorable, considering its great cast and that the first one was good. They've changed both the director and the writer, so that could have something to do with it. Though Danny Boyle and Alex Garland, the original director and writer, are listed as executive producers on this one, so they obviously had something to do with it. I think that this probably also had a bigger budget, maybe because the first one was so successful, and I say that purely because it's a bigger cast list of bigger names, but also just the storyline sounds bigger. It's talking about, you know, Britain recovering and all that sort of stuff, so it does sound like a bigger story than the contained one of the first movie, which I mentioned I actually quite liked that contained element, so I'm gonna see how it plays on a bigger scale. So that's all I've got to say, really, so I'm gonna jump in and get watching, and then we'll see what I think. Yeah, it's alright. Because I didn't remember pretty much anything from the film, I couldn't really compare it to what was actually the case. On its own merits as a film, there was things I liked about it and things I didn't, pretty par for the course. In comparison to the first one, I don't think this one had as many risks in it. It was a little bit more straightforward, and in many ways I liked that, but it also did kind of make it a bit more typical, if that makes sense. So I think what really made the first movie stand out is that it did make some interesting choices. Certain shots, I know I complained about them and I still, don't love them, but I could tell at least Danny Boyle was trying to do something interesting, whereas this director was keeping it a little bit more straight down the line, and I don't mind that, but it was different. They did keep a bunch of visual references to the original film, so I talked a little bit about how some shots were done with red lighting and how some kind of looked like they were filmed through gauze or sheet plastic, and they did keep a bit of that in this film as well. I think my favourite part of this film is that they didn't shy away from the more difficult moral questions and things like that. So, Robert Carlyle's character turns out to be a coward, like he left his wife to die. The relationship with his kids when they find out about that and things, like it added a layer of complexity to the story. And also the part where the military order their soldiers to fire on everybody and then firebomb the entire place in an effort to stop the infection spreading. it's one of those moral tests that are generally considered bad in films like this. Like, it's, you know, it's the antagonist who makes that call to, you know, wipe everybody out to save the rest, and then the good guys have to get out. And it's kind of like that in this, but it's also not, because, you know, it's sort of treated in many ways like the correct choice. Like, the only people who everyone agrees needs to survive is these kids, because they have, or potentially have, immunity in their blood. Whereas everybody else is like, yep, military's killing us, so, you know, got to get these kids out. But they don't really care so much what happens to themselves. So they understand that the sacrifice is necessary, and they don't pass judgments or swear or try and convince their commanding officer otherwise. And I appreciated that. I think that, you know, in reality, that kind of thing might need to be the right call sometimes, you know, even though it's horrifying to watch. I did like that they presented that in this film and kind of let the viewer make their own choices. So obviously in the first one, the main praise that I had was for the ending, that I liked the happy ending with the family unit type thing. And this film doesn't really get that. So the kids survive, but pretty much everybody else dies. Spoilers. I got it. Like, I thought that it was narratively necessary, but it's also not my favorite kind of narrative, if that makes sense. While I could appreciate why they did it, yeah, it didn't kind of hit me in the same way, and it wasn't that kind of, oh, this is a nice ending kind of thing, a feeling that I got from the first one. I speculated in the intro that perhaps this would be a bigger film, and yeah, it was. There was certainly, you know, everything from more aerial shots and more CGI and more extras and, you know, more locations and things like that. So it did feel less low budget than the first one. I don't know whether that was a good or a bad thing. It was just a different thing. As I said in the 28 Days Later review, I quite like the small and contained vibe that horror usually gives off. So this kind of had more of an action movie, you know, vibe to it. And I love action movies, so it's not a bad thing, but it was different. In my review for 7 Seconds, starring Wesley Snipes, I complained about the banter of the characters as the intro, and we had a bit of that in this too, that the soldiers, the American soldiers who have come over to be snipers, and they're sitting on the rooftop and watching people and, you know, making fun of them. And, like, I get the point of it, but it just made them all seem like assholes. It's obviously a pet hate of mine because I've brought it up a couple of times now. Obviously, this might not annoy everybody, but, I mean, I get that they want to introduce this camaraderie between these people, but why do they have to make them terrible people to do it? I just don't understand. Is that how friendships are elsewhere in the world? Is this an American thing? I don't know. Anyway, yeah, it just, it seems to be a recurring problem with some of these films I'm watching. Why can't they be nice people? What's going on? So I have to mention my favourite scene in this. I've said before that I kind of like action movies that don't take themselves too seriously, and often that means that I like absurd action sequences, I guess. So there's a guy in a helicopter and all these undead rushing across this field, and he tilts his helicopter down and just like mows through them all, and the blades like chop into them and stuff. And I thought that was really inventive and it was fun to watch. I mean, it was clearly ridiculous, but I enjoyed that. So that was 100% my favourite part of the whole thing. Not to say I didn't enjoy anything else, but yeah, I enjoyed that scene. I thought the acting was really good. I did think that the young boy in this was better than the teenage girl in the last movie. I thought I didn't mention it in the review, but I didn't think she was particularly good. But in this one, I think everybody was solid. I don't like Jeremy Renner, but I found him less offensive in this than I have in some other stuff, so, you know, that was good. But I love Rose Byrne. I thought she was terrific in this, and Imogen Poots was great. Robert Carlyle played the father really well. Overall, it was a really strong cast. I thought they continued the world really well in this, if that makes sense. So, you know, they thought through the logical conclusion of the first movie and thought about how the world would have moved on and how that could go terribly wrong. And I thought it was fairly clever as a sequel. You know, sometimes it's just terrible. They throw everything out the window and, you know, you just get frustrated with it. But with this, I was like, yeah, I could have seen that happening based on what I knew from the first one. So as I've mentioned, there was some good parts and there was some bad parts in this movie. So what did I think overall? I mean, it's fine, it's alright, it's a decent film, but, you know, it's not a favourite of mine, and I think that, particularly because I was willing to give away the first one, I think this one can probably go as well. If I see it again, I'm fine with that, but if I don't see it again, I'm also fine with that. I think that's a good question to ask myself in this process. You know, how do I feel if I never get to see this movie again? And if the answer is then I can probably get rid of the DVD. Next time, I'm going to be reviewing 39 Steps, starring Rupert Penry-Jones, and it is a remake of the Hitchcock one, kind of, so I'm very excited about seeing this one again. So what are your opinions on the 28 Days, Weeks Later series? Did you enjoy them? Do you think I made the right choice? Or do you disagree? Would you have kept the DVDs? Leave a comment below and let me know. Also, please consider subscribing if you're enjoying my channel. You'll get a notification of when I put out a new video. In the meantime, bye for now and happy watching.
Mm-hmm.